The Rundown with Carrie Saldo podcast is funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, offering assisted living and compass memory support with evidence-based treatment for those with memory loss. More at armbrookvillage.com.
This is The Rundown, your weekly news and review from Western Mass. Good morning, I'm Carrie Saldo. It's Friday, January 16th, 2026. Our Rundowners this week: Eric Lesler, Senior Counsel at WilmerHale, Dusty Christensen, Investigations Editor with The Shoestring, and Greg Sukinnick, News Editor at the Berkshire Eagle. If you have thoughts, email the rundown at nepm.org. That's the rundown at nepm.org. Coming up on the show, some Agawam residents have many thoughts about a proposed battery storage plant, but I'll get the panel's thoughts on one thing that those folks probably won't be able to say, which is no. And what's up with transparency or lack thereof in regards to public records requests and ballot question funding. But first, the headline: enrollment decline could cost Pittsfield City Schools an estimated $5 million in state Chapter 70 aid. That's education aid. Greg Sukinnick, you were at the Pittsfield Public Schools Committee meeting earlier this week. One of the glories of local reporting, covering those, but they're so important, that the coverage of that type of stuff. Tell us more about what you heard from Interim Superintendent Latifah Phillips.
Well, Pittsfield's that funding comes out of that Chapter 70 funding comes out of comes from a different variety of sources, or through a different variety of sources. The concern possibly is it's in decline in enrollment, and that can happen for any number of reasons. But there's also school choice numbers. Pittsfield has seen an increase in number of students leaving the district every day for school choice. It's up to 679 students a day. Basically, that's emptying out, it's like if you emptied out one of the larger schools every day and sent those kids out to Lenox, to Dalton, to Mount Greylock. Now the problem is the Chapter 70 money is doled out on a per pupil basis. So the fewer students you have, the less money you have. And also, when you start messing with those enrollment numbers, there's a possibility that the city might lose its designation for. It receives a little extra funding because it gets because it has more than 70% of its student population qualifies as economically disadvantaged. So there's a number of different small pots that combine could lead to a pretty significant loss in funding.
And that economically disadvantaged piece was a huge piece of the budget last year when Kristen Benke, their finance czar, who's with another district now, sort of found $2.4 million in the couch cushions, and it helped statewide because the state had accidentally undercounted that number. They've resolved that now.
And this is a district with need. This is a district that's trying to sort of fight its way back, like lots of districts from the COVID slide. But there's also the possibility they might make some money back through the success they've been having with career technical education. The investments in Taconic continue. They're still getting grant money for that for those programs at Taconic, and so there's some possibility they might be able to claw some of that back. But the other factor in the middle of all this is what's the budget going to look like coming from Boston and coming from Washington, particularly. Pittsfield relies on $9 million that funds 48 staff positions in its various Title I and SPED programs, and that money disappearing, that would, if you add that in, then we're really in for a roller coaster ride.
And this is coming at a time when, I should back up and say, the ebb and flow of these numbers is not all that unique. But last week, WBUR Sivan Lee reported, quote, enrollment in Massachusetts K-12 public schools has dropped to its lowest level in 3 decades. The drop in students for the 2025-2026 school year reflects one of the largest enrollment declines since the COVID pandemic. While there are always ebbs and flows, like I just said, this year's downward shift is dramatic, particularly in districts that typically enroll a high percentage of English learners who are new to the country. Eric Lesser, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think zooming out a second, this has been an uphill trend for us for a very long time, and that's exactly right, Carrie. There are going to be year-to-year fluctuations, but the trend line is unmistakably clear for the last decade plus. First, globally, people are having less kids. That's a trend across the industrialized world, and especially in the U.S. and especially in the Northeast. Massachusetts' population is getting older and has been essentially flat for many years. We've relied on immigration to keep those numbers up. Some states have lost population. We've had some gradual population increases almost entirely due to immigration. That's under strain now, of course, on a federal level. And then in Western Mass, it's even more pronounced. And the issue is really economic. We lose huge numbers of young people to more economically faster growing regions. The communities are aging. And, to the point that was just made, it's existential for us because the state aid is based on headcount. And to give people a sense of this, if you go from 25 students in a class to 22, your structural costs are the same, right? You still have the teacher there, you still have the utilities, the heat in the building, but you are now getting less money per student, and it creates a spiral for these school districts. The ultimate solution here is, maybe looking at how that per pupil reimbursement works, but most importantly, we got to get economic development into these communities, into Pittsfield, Holyoke. We need more investment. We need more jobs. There was a hope after COVID that remote work would kind of turn around some of these trends of out-migration, but it hasn't really played out that way. I push things like rail to connect the Western Mass with Eastern Mass for exactly this reason, but we've got to really stay focused on what the actual cause is here, and that is the fact that the economy is not creating enough of a magnet for people, especially young people with young families, to stay.
And zooming in on some of the other numbers across Western Mass, when I looked at the state figures, Greenfield is down 6.2% year over year, Northampton 4.8%, Pittsfield, and Greg's reporting 4.2%, Holyoke 3.7%. Dusty, what are you thinking as you look at this?
I just know, having covered these enrollment spirals, the worst way it's described in some districts, especially rural district, is a death spiral. Like, as you get less students, you get less funding because of that per pupil funding allocation. That means you have less services, and more students might decide to choice out of the district. You might lose the kinds of programs that you once had that were attractive to students in the district because they can choose to choice out. They maybe do so. And so it becomes this longer term problem for a district as it starts to lose students. So there really needs to be some bigger solution here.
And for me, I'm looking at this too as a potential statewide problem because the Chelsea superintendent told BUR that the cost of living is one of the driving factors that they're seeing in that district. So something clearly that's not unique to one district. We're looking at a potential statewide problem. Then if you're seeing the cost of living pushing people potentially not only out of potentially pushing them out of the state, then what implications does that have for us as a state at the federal level, federal funding, and things like that? Greg Sukenik, final thoughts on this?
We've been watching this sort of at the college level for a while. I was just writing about MCLA's presidential search and about their efforts to try to correct their enrollment decline. But it's we sort of look at this kind of broad view across the entire education spectrum. But really, I think that leads to some really difficult questions about employment in school districts, and whether even a city district that has 14 schools right now in Pittsfield has to start thinking about asking some uncomfortable questions.
Unless we leave people thinking this is all doom and gloom. You alluded to the fact that there are some potential remedies. You pointed out in your story some of the things they're doing. Just hit a couple of them.
I think the career technical education is where Pittsfield's really sort of they're banking on trying to draw. Taconic High School is they're trying to grow themselves a horticultural program, a plumbing program possibly. There's a grant application in for that, and those programs the state will reward you for those investments. There's possibility there.
Potential.
And also it's an opportunity also to maybe build a larger school and consolidate some of your smaller schools, as Pittsfield's going to do by replacing Crosby Elementary School and County Community School with a new school at the Crosby site.
Certainly something we're going to keep watching. Fresh off of our charging conversation from last week, onto
Hey.
a next topic.
Good
Battery
transition,
storage.
Carrie.
Thank you so much. The battery storage is in the news again this week. Jim Kinney for the Republican. Headline, "We're cooked. Agawam may not want a battery storage plant, but it is told there is no way to block it." Quote, "The project manager for a proposed 250 megawatt battery storage facility promised a room full of skeptical residents Monday his company will follow Agawam's stringent ordinance governing the controversial new technology. Rules covering fire safety, monitoring, and future decommissioning are the strongest that Long Road Energy's Chad Allen said he's ever seen, and tougher than statewide rules promising an easier path to approval." Interesting, though, they're still moving forward with this, given those stringent factors. Eric Lesser, Governor Maura Healey's administration has leaned into this type of stuff. WBUR reported that by 2030, the state hopes to procure at least 5,000 megawatts of this type of energy storage. This is 250 we're looking at potentially in Agawam. What do you make of this proposal?
Yeah, so just backing up again, this is really where the rubber meets the road on renewable energy. Not to get too technical, but for renewable sources like solar and wind, they're intermittent power sources. So you need battery infrastructure. In simple terms, when the sun is shining, the solar panels are producing energy, and then when the sun is not shining, you need to draw on the battery storage to provide that base power. The same for wind, right? So they go together. You can't really have massive new amounts of renewable energy coming online without the battery infrastructure. So the batteries have to go somewhere. That's the reason the legislature did some pretty dramatic and important, I think, permitting reforms to help streamline the placement of this type of renewable infrastructure. But it's got to go somewhere, and I have empathy for local communities that are trying to make sense of this. But people have to understand the trade-off. We're not going to be able to achieve renewable energy goals without the solar infrastructure, the wind infrastructure, and the battery storage. They all go together, and it has to go somewhere. So that's what we're going to now have to balance, because Agawam clearly has got some concerns.
Some of the residents' concerns that were raised this week at the meeting are what is known as runaway fires. If these batteries catch on fire, my husband's a firefighter, the only thing you can do basically is contain and let it burn out. There's nothing that can be done once they start going. So that's a potential concern folks have. Also, if the batteries leach or things like that. But officials with these companies say the technology is safe and stable, even though, it's one of those trade-off type of things. In Agawam specifically, the reason in the headline, one town resident said we're cooked, this particular site is already zoned industrial. And so I think where other towns, we've seen Westfield say no to this. There's a proposal we talked about last week in Southampton. They're debating it. Pittsfield has a couple of proposals that are being discussed. Pittsfield is a little bit different, though, Greg, because it's using, it would be converting an existing peaker plant, right? Tell us about peaker plants.
That's an idea where the residents actually would be happy to see something like this happen. And I think part of it is probably also because how close residences are to the Agawam site, as opposed to Pittsfield has a peaker plant. Basically, it's a cogen plant that's used for when there's a real power demand. Often that's in the summer. It's based on the General Dynamics / General Electric, an industrial campus. So it's already pretty industrial. But the residents who live near those smokestacks, even though it runs not very often, it's not a clean plant. And the average mortality age of mortality is lower in the neighborhoods near this plant. And so the folks, the city would be interested in being able to keep economic development going on there and be able to keep getting tax revenue out of it. But the residents would be happy to see that soot go away and still have sort of a positive use for the property that still pays taxes.
Dusty, we're seeing these proposals, as Jim Kinney pointed out, we talked about here last week on the show as well. They're popping up across Western Mass, largely because we've got a lot of land out here, right? And it's less expensive land that you might see in the eastern part of the state. Environmental reporting is something in your bag of tricks as a journalist. What do you make make of this?
Yeah, I think that these are complicated issues. There is no black and white here. As Eric was saying, there's trade-offs for every energy source that we use. Obviously, fossil fuel is enormously dirty and polluting and contributes to rising asthma rates and other ill effects on people's health. There obviously is trade-offs for clean, renewable energy as well, whether we're talking about where solar panels are being sited. There's been big fights over that in places where developers want to clear-cut trees in order to put solar panels in for electricity, to be generated. With these battery storage facilities, people do have these concerns about fires, obviously about leaching. This is where the rubber hits the road, to use the phrase that Eric used when it comes to moving into this new era of renewable energy. I think it's a conversation that's been going on for a long time at the state level, and I imagine will continue to go on as more communities face these kinds of struggles between the desire for clean energy versus what does it actually mean to have these facilities in your community.
More to come on this topic. Still to come here on the rundown, we are going to talk about transparency in government records and in ballot questions. Stay with us here on 88.5 NEPM. The Rundown. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. Still talking about our last topic. I'm Carrie Saldo. I am joined in studio by former State Senator Eric Lesser and journalist Dusty Christensen and Greg Stukenik. On to some recent reporting by you, Dusty. Reported in the Shoestring. The headline, Judge sides with journalist against Northwestern DA. The top cop for Hampshire and Franklin counties must now turn over unredacted disclosures of criminal police misconduct or appeal the case to a higher court. Dusty, before we get to the latest, give us a little bit of the backstory about how we got here.
Yeah, sure. So the documents in question here, this journalist was trying to obtain through a public records request are what's known as Brady disclosures. In short, prosecutors and DA's offices are required by law, not just here in Massachusetts, to turn over any evidence that could be exculpatory, meaning any evidence that might prove somebody's innocence or contribute to their case in some way must be turned over by a prosecutor in a case. And part of that is turning over what's known as a Brady disclosure. It's named after a Supreme Court case, and these are disclosures that let defendants know if a police officer involved in their case maybe had some misconduct in their past or some thing that happened that could potentially question their credibility on the witness stand for when this case ultimately goes to trial. So the district attorney's office has been withholding the names of officers in these Brady disclosures in various ways for about 4 years now. These are also records that I tried to obtain shortly after the reporter in question, Andrew Comer, first reported that he was being stymied by District Attorney David Sullivan.
Why? So in this instance, why did the judge decide to uphold this journalist's request?
You know, the DA's argument was essentially about 2 years into the lawsuit, the DA turned over about half of the records unredacted that his office had related to police officers who were credibly accused of misconduct internally within the police department. What he didn't turn over were documents that alleged criminal misconduct on the part of police officers. Let's say a police officer was found guilty of driving drunk, for example, or of domestic violence or something of the sort. Those were the documents that the DA's office was not turning over in completely unredacted form. And their logic was that that was protected under what's known as the Criminal Offender Record Information Law, or QORI, in Massachusetts. They were making the argument that that's protected information. The journalist really pushed back on that with his lawyer, Andrew Comer, the journalist, because that is the kind of information that, candidly, the DA's office turns over all the time when it comes to civilians who are accused of one particular crime in one particular case. It's not like they're turning over, a person's entire criminal record. We're talking about one case at a time here. Ultimately, that's what the judge agreed to as well, that this did not amount to, if the DA's office turned over these disclosures, it didn't amount to the DA's office turning over information about somebody's entire criminal record, which would be protected under this law, but rather a case-by-case basis.
And Comer's larger point here is that, with the way the Massachusetts public records law is structured, basically journalists have two choices, as you pointed out, right? You can drop the pursuit of these public records, or you can sue for them. Eric Lesser, I'm not going to point to you as the lawyer in the room, but I am going to point to you as the lawyer in the room. Is this a gaping hole in this law? What do you think?
Well,
And former state legislator, I should point out.
Gaping hole would imply that it's not an intentional way that the public disclosure laws are constructed. I mean, to be clear, there have been many attempts over the years to change the public records laws. They've been rejected by multiple legislatures under multiple governors. There's a lot of reasons for that we can get into. First, kudos to Dusty. It was a really well done and well researched article. There's a balance to be struck here, but it sounds like the judge, probably made the right call. You do have to balance sometimes, disclosing names of people under active investigation. There's privacy concerns. People are sometimes wrongfully accused, as they are in a civilian context. But it seems hard for me to imagine how it wouldn't be relevant for a defense attorney or for the public to know about some really serious misconduct allegations lodged against specific officers.
Greg Sukenik, the Eagle is no stranger to suing for public records law. What do you make of this?
It's simple transparency and accountability, and accountability starts in the mirror. If your government, paid for by your tax dollars, is going to hold people accountable for criminal misconduct, then it needs to be prepared to hold itself to that same standard. And I think it's, and obviously there are the things that Eric talked about are, perfectly legitimate reasons to withhold some of these things, on a case by case basis. But overall, we're talking about, this is the government being able to take away people's, restrict people's freedom because they've committed a crime. So I think, there has to be balance there.
The next steps here, DA Sullivan's office, has he released the records as the judge has ordered him to do? He has until December 30th, or does he intend to appeal? Do we know?
Last time I checked, he had not released them. His office said that they were considering appealing or not. We will just have to wait and see whether this moves up to the appellate level or whether his office decides to release these records to the public.
To be continued. All right, so staying with transparency, but taking from a different angle, the Boston Globe had an editorial this week. The headline, "Lifting the Curtain on the Money Behind Ballot Questions. As issues proliferate, so should timely disclosures of their special interest donors." That's the editorial board of the Boston Globe's opinion. Quoting here, "Ballot questions, love them or hate them, are becoming an ever larger part of how lawmaking is done in this state. This year, as many as 11 questions could be headed for the ballot come November on everything from income tax cuts to enhancing the state's public records law, as we just discussed a little bit about. But contributions supporting those ballot questions, contributions that also fund those often ubiquitous TV ads during election season, don't come under the same strict reporting requirements as does money given to political candidates." Before I get into the specifics of those differences, Eric Lesser, you know a thing or two about these disclosures. What do you make of the difference between the ballot question disclosures and the disclosures candidates are subject to?
Yeah, no, not to get too technical, but the candidates, so when the governor is running, state legislators are running, county officials, they have very, very strict disclosure requirements and also contribution limits. It's limited to $1,000 per person per year per candidate. Those are among the strictest donation and disclosure limits in the entire country. It is not the same structure or regulatory system around ballot questions. And legislators, frankly, are frustrated, and I don't blame them, that they have to follow one set of rules and the referendum campaigns have to follow a different set. So there's actually a bill and an active debate in the Senate right now to require, for example, monthly disclosures of this ballot spending. I think it's a good idea because there's often very big money involved on both sides of each of these different ballot referendums, and I think the public, has a right to know where the different equities fall. And this is, by the way, going to be a wild year for ballot questions. You mentioned the income tax one. There's going to be a question to cut the income tax from 5% to 4%. There's likely going to be a question on a statewide rent control. These are huge topics.
Whether or not to repeal cannabis. You mentioned the pending legislation. Paul Mark, senator from our region, is supporting it. There's an identical version, as I understand, in the House. John Barrett, state representative, and State Representative Representative Lindsay Sabadosa, all from the 413, are among those who've signed on to that. Under current law, ballot campaign spending has an 8-month period when contributions and expenditures go completely unreported. That period ends only 60 days before the election. In 2024, when there were 5 questions on the statewide ballot, Massachusetts ranked among the top 10 states in spending. According to Common Cause, during the last 10 years, that's 6 election cycles, more than $340 million was received by ballot campaigns. Some 36% was raised in that 8-month kind of dark period. Greg Sukenik, what are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking I work for a for-profit company that actually sells advertising, so but what's good for us isn't necessarily good for everyone else. And I can't imagine what, I guess we're going to have to imagine what the spending on 11 ballot questions is going to look like. And what it's going to sound like and feel like too. The transparency there. I think one of the notable things about that law was, everyone knew that MTA was supporting the, question 2, but the amount of money
Teachers Association,
right,
you're talking about the MCAS.
The MCAS
repeal.
question, that's right, thank you. And but the amount of money that they spent, I think, caught people off guard, and it turned out that, hey guys, you probably should have told us that you spent that much money. So it's
the MTA, according to this was mentioned in the Globe's piece, the MTA financed more than $15.7 million of the $16.5 million spent.
Right. That's a lot of money, and that's on one question.
And then ultimately, the Mass Teachers Association were fined because it's late filing. They filed a bunch, $2.37 million on Election Day, but they're fined $4,000. So it's a quarter of a drop in the bucket in terms of the spending.
I think, again, to zoom out, I'm biased as a former legislator, but I don't think it's good public policy to create laws by ballot referendum. They're highly susceptible from one end or the other to spending, to the proliferation of TV ads, and then frankly, there's no nuance in a lot of these ballot questions. When a law has to go through a committee process, has to be voted on in the House, in the Senate, is subject to amendment, potential veto by the governor, implementation by state agencies, there's a lot of opportunity, frankly, more opportunity for public input, for tweaking, for adjusting. This is an overall, I think, damaging trend for the state that we've moved to more and more ballot questions on bigger and bigger topics every year. And it's something that I think the legislature needs to take notice of and get more involved on the front end to prevent these from happening.
Changes to spending, Dusty? Are you thinking more stiff penalties? Where are you landing on this?
It's just not hard. Like as Eric Lesser would have had to report to the OCPF. That's the agency that tracks these kinds of things.
Campaign finance.
Yes, it's my understanding that they just get connected with a candidate's or campaign's bank account, and you can see the next day.
It's automatic.
It's automatic. What kind of money is coming into a campaign? It should be no different for ballot questions.
Yeah, and the Globe agrees. Letting the public know who those people and those organizations are, and doing that in a timely fashion at least gives voters the kind of information they need to make an informed decision. So that's where the Globe editorial comes down on it, and I tend to agree with them. All right. Heading on to our Scoop Praiser prediction portion of the show, we can ask our panel to make a prediction about the news, maybe give us some info on a story they're working on, or heap some praise on a newsworthy nugget. Greg Sukenik, what's on your mind?
I'd like some praise for a couple of my colleagues, Clarence Fanto and Jeffrey Borak. Both wrote about the passing of Tina Packer. She was the founding of Shakespeare and Company, which grew to become one of the more important cultural institutions in the Berkshires. And her passing was, she died last week. And she was a notable figure, sort of a force of nature, really.
Yeah.
And Clarence, who covers Lennox for us, as a correspondent, and Jeff, who's been the Eagles theater critic forever, both wrote really, really well about her legacy. Those are things you could check out on BerkshireEagle.com.
Fantastic. Tina Packer,
worth noting.
And her impact goes well beyond the Berkshires nationally and internationally in terms of what she's done in theater, but also the way that they have used theater to transform the lives of young people. Eric Lesser, Scoop, Ray's prediction, what do you think?
Just some praise. It's January, it's ski season for all of our local ski resorts, Berkshire East, Otis Ridge, Butternut, the list goes on. They're doing great. people should get out and support them while the weather's good.
All right. And night skiing was first rolled down hills in Bosque in Pittsfield, Massachusetts because of the electric lights of General Electric. Little fun fact for folks. Dusty Christensen, scoop praise prediction.
Just a praise to all the folks fighting for transparency, journalists. Obviously, that's what I come from, whether it's here, Andrew Comier suing for records, or in Minneapolis right now, covering the real crackdown on people's civil liberties there.
I have praise for the Smith College women's basketball team. They remain undefeated. They played this week. They are now 13-0. They beat Middlebury College this week, and their next game is tomorrow, January 17th, at the U.S. Coast Guard Academy. They're a fantastic team. Carrie Baker covers it talks about it in the Daily Hampshire Gazette. The history of Smith women's basketball started at Smith. So you can check that out in the Daily Hampshire Gazette. My thanks to our panel this week, Eric Lesser, Dusty Christensen, and Greg Sukenik. You've been listening to The Rundown here on 88.5 NEPM. I'm Carrie Saldo. Get out there. Maybe go skiing or snowboarding or tubing. Have a fantastic weekend, everybody.